Spirit. In the Old Testament, in the book of Exodus, we are given the history of the Hebrew people when they were in captivity to the Egyptians for some 400 years. And as you probably know, Prophet Moses was sent by the Lord to free them through various means. After all these things came to pass, and the Pharaoh was convinced that he had to let the Israelis go out of slavery, they had to do it very quickly. On account of that, they had no time to prepare all their food as though they normally would. And their bread in particular, rather than having it and giving it time to rise and become the true bread that people normally eat, they never had the time for it to have the leaven, the yeast, and all those sorts of things that make it rise. So basically they ended up with pancakes, flat type of bread. In order to commemorate for the Israelis this flee from Egypt and the freedom that they were given, the Lord ordained for them to always have that as a memorial, and on their particular Sabbath to eat that flat, unleavened bread, the pancakes. When the Lord came, and on the last days when he was with his apostles, he gave us a new covenant, a new one. He fulfilled that law of Moses, of the Old Testament. He ate the Passover with them, with his apostles, the flat bread, the unleavened bread. After he had done that, he took regular bread, the one that the people normally eat, the leavened bread, and he blessed it, broke it, and gave it to his apostles as the first indicator of the Eucharist, the Holy Communion. He told them to do that always, as we are doing today. Normally we don't here talk too much about the comparisons between other people who call themselves Christian and the Orthodox. But on this particular day, I would like to point out to you some of the things that happen amongst millions of people in the world, in particular the Papists, the Roman Catholics. Because to this day, they still do not accept the fact that the Lord used regular bread for the Eucharist. They still want to hang on to that Old Testament bread, the unleavened bread, the bread of sorrow, of haste, of bitterness, which they had to, the Israelis had to prepare in order to flee quickly. Christ came and gave us that peace and all that time for us to prepare proper bread, regular bread, and to commune with that. And since then, since the very first communion was ever performed by the Lord, and therefore by his apostles in the Catacomb Church, unleavened bread was never used. The Sabbath that they commemorated was put aside with the new covenant being the Eucharist of the regular bread and grape wine, the red grape wine. And we, as Orthodox Christians, continue with that same tradition that was given to us from the very first day. I had a look at some of the recipes that the Papists use for their unleavened bread, and I was shocked. It's very much like the sort of things you read on the packaging of foods in the supermarket. Not only does it have flour, it has various chemicals. It's got bicarbonate, it's got preservatives, it's got oils, it's got sugar. It's such a chemical mix, and they make out of it today these sort of crackers, crisps, chips, which you can buy in Catholic shops. I don't know how they do it at their so-called Mass, but certainly they don't do what the Orthodox do. Let me show you the Orthodox bread, the one that is used in most churches. The first thing you notice is it's two pieces, the two natures of Christ, the divine and the human. Can you do that with a cracker or a crisp? You can't do that. When the priest prepares the Eucharist, he first cuts out the centre bit, which is the part that you commune with. That's the part that gets sanctified and becomes Christ's body. That's the part, right? You could commune with that. Then the priest commemorates the Most Holy Mother of God with this bit here. Then there are 6 other commemorations here. First one being the angelic hosts, the forerunner. Then there are the holy prophets, then the holy apostles, the bishops, the holy bishops of the church, the God-bearing fathers, the various ascetics. Then we have the unmercenary saints, like Cosmas and Damian and all those. Here we commemorate the saints of the day. That's why we need the calendar. We read all the saints of this particular day, including St. Olga and St. Vladimir and Cosmas and Damian, who produced the Slavic language. And finally, the liturgical father, in this case St. John Chrysostom. On other days, if it's St. Basil's liturgy, we commemorate St. Basil. After that, we commemorate those who are living. First of all, the bishop and the priests. Then all those living people, when you give your lists in, for the sick, or just for anybody that is wanting to have a commemoration. And also for the armed forces, those that have to sacrifice their life in order to protect the church. So these are all the living commemorations. Finally, we go to those who have reposed. All the reposed ones that were sort of saintly, that established the mission, established the temple. Like in our case, Elder Justine, Metropolitan Philaret, Hierarch Herman, Father Seraphim, those. And then all those whom you give your names to commemorate of your loved ones that have passed away. All these pieces, we do not commune with them. They are left on the platen to be put into the chalice after communion. This is the only part you commune with. Then finally the priest takes a small piece out for himself at the back. That is then cut up as your prosfora, which you take home. When those pieces are put in the chalice after Holy Communion, those for whom are commemorated get benefit from that in some sort of mystical way. Now think about it. You know what a potato chip looks like. How can you possibly do that with a potato chip? A crisp. I mean, it's absurd. If you read the Gospels in Greek, which was the original language they were written in, it's quite clear that Christ communed with leavened bread, not with unleavened bread. He used the unleavened bread for the Passover, finished with that, then took bread, sanctified it, broke it, and gave it out to the people, to his apostles and disciples. That's how it is. Sometimes some churches, particularly the Russians, will use smaller prosfora for these other commemorations, because the tradition is you bring this bread to the church, and you might bring a dozen or 2 dozen or however many. priest picks the best ones, and he uses that for the liturgy. The rest he cuts up and uses, he blesses it and uses it for Prosfora. Therefore, you have a whole play in it. It's your Eucharist. It's not what the priest's Eucharist, it's your Eucharist. You are the one that produced this. You are the one who are going to partake of this. It's very important for women especially to learn to bake this sort of bread. It's not allowed to have preservatives, sugars, or chemicals. It's pure flour, water, yeast, and a little bit of salt which helps the yeast to work. That's it. No oils, no other additives, no preservatives or anything of that type. That's why we're very reluctant to buy something like this, because we don't know what's in it. It's up to you, the faithful, to make sure that you make it and bring it and do it in the way that the Orthodox have always done. So that's essentially the situation with the holy bread that has become the Eucharist, which becomes indeed Christ's body and blood, still in the form that looks like bread and wine, usually, but sometimes it does appear in the form of flesh and blood, if the Lord so deems it necessary. In which case the priest has to read special prayers if that occurs. And it does occur. It does occur. So now you have a bit of an understanding of why it's like this and why it's so important in our lives. And certainly it's a good thing for everybody to be able to produce this, because as we're heading now for this catacomb situation, it's going to be even more important. We don't know where we're going to be having liturgy or how or what, but we need to be able to always have access to something like this. That's basically what I wanted to say to you today about the bread, that it is rather absurd that millions of people around the world use crackers. Can't understand that. Millions. And they insist that Christ communed the new covenant with unleavened bread, when it's quite simple in the Greek. The bread that is mentioned there is leavened bread. There's a special word in Greek, which is one word which means leavened bread. And there's another word which means unleavened bread. And there's no confusion. In English, we don't distinguish it. So there's confusion. In any case, that's the situation. The church now has entered a phase where we are very much concentrated on the commemoration of various saints, and today being the first Sunday after Pentecost is called the Sunday of All Saints, so we commemorate all the saints. And over the weeks you will hear the saints being commemorated from Romania, Russia, Israel, America, all the countries of the land. Look out for that and be astute to your own calendar. When you come to church, have a look at the calendar the day before to see what is going on, so that you understand it. God help us in this, that we may be able to, in these apostate times, always to have access to this and to have Holy Communion the way that the first apostles did, as they were taught by the Lord and as they did by the Lord. And through that, we may obtain the likeness to Christ, which is our basic aim in life. Amen.